Imagine giving 16 years of your life to a family that never once looked close enough to see what you were doing. Imagine paying the mortgage on a house you do not live in, covering a car note for a car you will never drive, sending tuition money for a college you never attended yourself, month after month, year after year, in complete silence. Not because nobody would have thanked you, but because nobody ever knew it was you. 16 years. Not one acknowledgement, not one question, not one moment where anyone in that family stopped and asked, "Wait, who is actually holding all of this together?" That was Carol Washington's life. And after 16 years of carrying her family on her back, without a single word of credit, her younger sister sent her a text message. Not a phone call, a text 7 words long, telling her not to come to the wedding. She read it once. She placed the phone face down on her granite kitchen counter. She did not cry. She did not text back. She did not call anyone. She sat perfectly still in her Decatur apartment for a long moment. The morning light coming through the blinds. Atlanta going on as usual outside the window. And then she opened her laptop. What Carol did in the next 48 hours would leave her family with nothing. This is not a story about a wedding. This is a story about 16 years of silence that nobody thought to count. Until Carol Washington sat down one night and counted it herself. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why Carol Washington smiled the day her family called her crying. To understand what she did in those 48 hours, you need to go back. Not to September, not even to the text message. You need to go back to a Sunday morning in March of 2007, in a suburb of Atlanta called East Point, Georgia, where a family of 4 sat in a hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent light, and the heaviness of a waiting room where good news is no longer possible. Because the story of what happened between Carol and the family she loved in silence for 16 years did not begin with a wedding invitation. It began with a funeral. It began with the death of the one man who had been holding everything together, without anyone realizing how fragile that balance truly was. His name was Harold Washington, and the moment he left this world, the weight he had been carrying for 3 decades landed without warning on the shoulders of his oldest daughter. Harold Washington was not a wealthy man by any traditional measure. He had never driven a new car off the lot or taken his family on a vacation that required a passport. But Harold was reliable in the truest sense of the word, the kind of man who had the mortgage paid a full week early every single month for over 20 years without exception. He worked as a warehouse supervisor at a logistics company in East Point, and had done so for 31 years with a steady dignity that does not make headlines but keeps families standing. He coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings at the church gymnasium. He showed up to every school event, every recital, every parent-teacher conference Patricia scheduled without once being reminded. He was, by every measure that mattered to the people who loved him, a cornerstone. And like most cornerstones, nobody fully understood what he was holding up until the building began to shake. Harold died of a sudden cardiac arrest on March 7, 2007. He was 54 years old. There were no warning signs anyone had recognized. He collapsed at work after a Monday morning shift briefing, and by the time the ambulance reached Grady Memorial Hospital, he was already gone. Patricia was reached by phone. She screamed so loudly that both neighbors on either side of the house came to their front doors. Carol, who was at her apartment in Decatur, drove a 40-minute commute in 17 minutes. She was 22 years old. When she walked into that hospital corridor, she saw 2 things. Her mother collapsed into a plastic chair, unable to form a sentence, and her little sister Tamara, 13 years old, small and frightened, holding a cup of apple juice with both hands, looking at everyone around her with wide eyes, waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. Carol looked at her mother. She looked at Tamara. She looked at the stack of hospital paperwork sitting on the chair beside Patricia, forms that someone needed to fill out and sign. she picked up the pen. And something shifted inside Carol Washington that afternoon that would not shift back for a very long time. There was no dramatic moment where she stood and made a declaration. It was quieter than that, the quiet settling of a decision she would carry for the next 16 years without ever fully unpacking what it was costing her. Someone had to hold this family. Someone had to keep her mother in that house, keep her sister in school, keep the lights on, and the mortgage paid, and the refrigerator stocked. Harold was gone. Patricia had not worked in 11 years. Carol was the oldest. In her mind, it was what had to happen. She did not look for another option. She made herself the option. Harold left behind $14,000 in a savings account and a small life insurance policy, enough to cover the funeral with very little remaining. The house in East Point carried a mortgage with over 20 years still left on it and a monthly payment of $1,200. Patricia's income was zero. Tamara was 13 years old and would need school supplies, clothes, and in 5 years, college tuition. Carol had just started a junior analyst position at a financial services firm in downtown Atlanta, earning $38,000 a year before taxes. She was barely covering her own rent and her own car payment in Decatur. By every logical calculation, the math did not work. Carol sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a calculator for 3 hours the week after the funeral, and she knew it clearly. The math did not work. She made it work anyway. Here is what most people never understand about the Carol Washingtons of this world. They do not begin with one enormous sacrifice. They begin with a small decision. A single bill covered here, a payment redirected there. Without announcement, without asking for acknowledgement. Carol's first act was to send $200 a month toward the family's utility bills. She opened a second checking account for that purpose alone and set up automatic payments from it. She did not tell her mother the money was coming from her. She told Patricia that Harold had arranged for certain accounts to continue on autopay, and the payments would keep going. Patricia did not ask questions. She was grieving, overwhelmed, and grateful in the way people are grateful when they do not fully understand what they are receiving. Carol counted on that. She understood her mother in ways her mother had never understood her. And she used that understanding to construct a financial structure that would hold an entire family standing for 16 years without anyone looking behind it. Within 8 months, Carol had absorbed the full mortgage payment. Within 2 years, she was also covering Tamara's school clothes, her extracurricular fees, and the monthly note on Patricia's Buick LeSabre. A car Carol had co-signed at a dealership in Union City because her mother's credit score was not strong enough to qualify on her own. By the time Tamara graduated from high school in 2012, Carol had been maintaining a separate savings account earmarked for college tuition, depositing money into it every month with the consistency other people bring to a retirement fund. $100 some months, $200, sometimes $3, without announcement, without expectation of recognition. Because to Carol, this was not generosity that required a receipt. It was obligation. It was love expressed in the only language she had fully learned. Action without acknowledgement, care without credit, sacrifice that asked absolutely nothing in return from the people it was sustaining. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By 2015, Carol Washington was earning $72,000 a year. She had been promoted twice and was now a loan officer managing a mid-sized commercial portfolio at her firm in downtown Atlanta. She had moved into a nicer apartment in Decatur, considered and comfortable, with hardwood floors and a small balcony overlooking the treetops. She owned furniture she had chosen for herself. She cooked well on weekends. She had a loyal circle of friends who knew her and loved her deeply. By any honest standard, Carol was not living small. She was living deliberately. But nobody in her family knew any of that. because she had become extraordinarily skilled at maintaining two separate versions of herself. There was the Carol who sat in conference rooms in blazers and ran commercial loan portfolios. And there was the Carol who arrived at Sunday dinner in East Point in plain clothes and let the conversation move past her without ever offering a single detail of her own life. She did not do this out of shame. Carol had no shame about who she was or what she had built. She kept the two lives clean and separate because she had seen firsthand what happened when family members discovered someone had resources. She had watched it happen to her father's younger brother, a man who received a modest inheritance and found his extended family arriving one by one with open hands and thoughtful explanations until within 3 years he had almost nothing left. Carol had decided, without consulting anyone, that she would rather be underestimated than drained. She would give from behind the curtain, where no hand could be traced back to hers. The devastating irony, the detail that makes this story genuinely painful to sit with, is that she was taken from anyway. Not aggressively, not deliberately, but steadily and completely, by people who loved her and never once thought to look at what they were standing on. And the worst part? The dynamic she had been working so hard to protect herself from had already taken root inside the very family she was protecting. It had been growing for years, fed by assumptions nobody examined and opinions nobody questioned. And the name of the woman who would finally give it a voice was Beverly James. At Sunday dinners in East Point, the conversation around Patricia Washington's kitchen table followed a rhythm that anyone who grew up in a black household in the American South would recognize immediately. There was always too much food, deliberately so, because abundance at the table was a form of dignity. Patricia had never surrendered, even in the leanest years. There was church conversation, delivered with the precision of a woman who had attended Greater Faith Baptist Church for nearly 4 decades. There was warm and detailed discussion of Tamara's life, her plans, her relationships, whoever she was spending her time with. And then there was the brief, polite inquiry about Carol. "How's work, baby?" Answered with, "It's fine, Mama." And then the conversation moved on. It always moved on. Carol had accepted that rhythm so long ago she had stopped registering it. She had adjusted to the temperature of the room without ever asking why it never changed for her. What Carol did notice, over time in pieces, through second-hand accounts from her cousin Deborah and her Aunt Ruth, was the way Patricia described her to other people. Patricia had a specific way of presenting her 2 daughters to the world. Tamara was the one doing things, going somewhere, building something, moving forward with her life. Carol was the one who was fine, stable, didn't cause trouble. There was genuine affection in it. But underneath the affection, accumulating across years like moisture behind a wall, invisible until the structure begins to fail, was a soft and consistent dismissal that had been hardening for a long time. Patricia was not a cruel woman. She was a woman raised to believe that image was survival, that showing up polished and proud was how black families in the South held their dignity against a world that was always looking for a reason to diminish them. Carol did not perform in the language her mother respected, and over time, that silence had been quietly mistaken for smallness. That long, unexamined assumption about who Carol Washington was, and what she was worth to the people she had been holding up in the dark, was about to be tested by one dinner table, one woman with sharp opinions, and 7 words sent through a phone screen on a Tuesday morning in March. And nothing in the Washington family would ever look the same on the other side of it. When Tamara came home one Sunday in January, with a diamond ring on her finger, and Derek James sitting beside her on the couch with his hands folded, like a man who had rehearsed this exact moment, Patricia Washington wept with a joy she had not felt since the day Harold died. But from the opposite direction entirely. She held Tamara's hand, turned the ring in the light, and said, "Your father would have been so proud of you." And she meant every syllable. The room filled with the warmth that only arrives when a family believes something genuinely good is finally happening. Carol sat in the corner chair with a cup of sweet tea and smiled across the room at her sister. She meant it too. She had always loved Tamara with the complicated, full love that older sisters carry. The love that includes watching someone be celebrated in ways you never were and choosing over and over to be glad for them anyway. Within 2 weeks of the engagement, Patricia had selected a venue, the Grand Ballroom at a hotel in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and was circulating a guest list that grew every time she picked up the phone. The wedding was set for September. The budget Patricia had assembled in her mind bore almost no relationship to the money she actually had available. The venue alone required a $5,000 deposit and a total cost of $18,000. There were catering estimates, florist quotes, photographer inquiries, all arriving with price tags that added up to a figure north of $40,000. And through all of it, the planning calls, the trips to the bridal shop on Campbellton Road, the excited group text threads, nobody paused to do the arithmetic honestly. Nobody had to, because somewhere in Patricia's mind, in the place where mothers store the things they rely on without examining, there was a steady certainty that Carol would help if it came to it. Carol always helped. That was what Carol did. Carol helped. In February, when Tamara called and said the venue needed a deposit, or they would lose the September date, Carol answered on the second ring. She did not ask about the overall financial plan. She did not ask who was covering the balance. She said, "How much do they need?" And when Tamara said $5,000, Carol said, "I'll put it on my card today." She hung up, opened her laptop, entered her credit card information on the venue website, and the booking was confirmed within the hour, 4 minutes from the call to the confirmation email. 16 years of reflex compressed into 4 minutes. She did not mark it in her calendar, or think about it again after closing the laptop. She returned to what she had been doing before the phone rang. That 4-minute transaction would become the single most consequential credit card charge in the Washington family's history. But she did not know that yet. It was a Sunday evening in early March, 6 weeks after the engagement, when Derek James's mother, Beverly James, hosted a coordination dinner at her home in Stone Mountain to begin aligning both families on the wedding details. Beverly had cooked the entire meal herself: baked chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans, cornbread from scratch. The table was set with cloth napkins and real glassware. Beverly James was the kind of woman who communicated her standards through domestic precision. Every detail of her home arranged to signal a household with expectations, and those expectations extended to the people who entered it. She was gracious with Tamara. She was warm and respectful toward Patricia. And from the moment Carol walked through the front door, Beverly was watching her with the careful, steady attention of a woman who has already reached a conclusion and is now searching patiently for evidence to confirm it. Carol arrived the way she always arrived to family events: dark slacks, a simple blouse, small gold studs in her ears. She had driven over in her 2003 Honda Accord with the cracked rear bumper she had been meaning to repair for 4 years. She did not discuss her career unless directly asked. She listened more than she spoke. She complimented Beverly's food sincerely because it was sincerely excellent. By any fair measure, she was pleasant company. Composed, considerate, easy to be around. But Beverly James was reading a different story. Beverly was looking at the woman who would appear in the photographs at her son's wedding reception. And what she saw, the understated clothes, the old car in the driveway, the absence of the social performance Beverly associated with a woman who had built something for herself, did not match the picture she had been assembling in her mind for this occasion. After dinner, while Tamara and Derek carried plates to the kitchen, Beverly guided Patricia away from the table on the pretense of helping with coffee. The kitchen door did not close all the way. Carol, seated in the living room with Derek's father, could hear voices, too low to make out clearly, but close enough to catch the shape of what was being said. She heard her own name twice. She caught Beverly's tone, measured, diplomatic, the careful delivery of a woman who's reached a verdict, and is now presenting it in the most palatable framing available. And she heard Patricia's silence in response. The long pause before Patricia finally said anything at all. That pause told Carol more than any spoken sentence could have. She reached for her phone and looked at the screen as though a notification had arrived. Nothing had. She was giving herself somewhere to look while she processed what she already understood was coming. 11 minutes later, Patricia came back into the living room with the managed smile of a woman holding something internal that has not yet been resolved. She squeezed Carol's hand and said, "Everything is fine, baby." Carol said, "I know, Mama." They sat through the rest of the evening. Carol ate dessert. She said gracious goodbyes to Beverly at the door. She drove home on the highway in the dark without turning on the radio. She sat in her building's parking lot for a moment before going inside. She was not crying. She was thinking. Carol Washington had understood, in that 11-minute kitchen silence, exactly what was coming next. She had been reading her family for 22 years. She knew what the careful smile meant. She knew what the hand squeeze without eye contact meant. And she had now decided that when it arrived, she would not be caught off guard. She would simply be ready. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning in March, while Carol was at her desk reviewing a commercial loan application, her phone buzzed beside her keyboard. She looked at the screen. The name said Tamara. She picked it up. It was not a call. It was a text message. It read, "We need you not to come to the wedding. It's for the best. Please understand." 7 words of exclusion delivered through a screen. No phone call, no face-to-face conversation. No acknowledgement of what Carol had given that family, of what she had done, month after month, year after year, without ever being asked to stop. Just a text. The format of minimum exposure, sent by a younger sister who had decided that efficiency was preferable to honesty when the verdict being delivered carried this much weight. Carol read it twice. She placed the phone face down on her desk. Then she finished reviewing the loan application she had been working on before it arrived. She attended her 1 o'clock meeting. She responded to 3 emails. She signed 2 documents. She did everything the afternoon required of her in a completely normal, professional, uninterrupted way, nobody looking at Carol through the glass wall of her office that Tuesday would have seen any sign that anything had shifted inside her. Then she drove home to Decatur. She made a cup of tea. She sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of her apartment and allowed herself, fully without distraction, to feel what that message actually meant. Not just the pain of being excluded, though the pain was real and she did not dismiss it. What she was feeling was something older and heavier than pain. It was the devastating clarity that arrives when a person understands that everything they believed they were building through sacrifice, all the care, all the invisible architecture of love constructed over 16 years, had been completely and irreversibly misread by every single person it was meant for. The tea went cold. Carol did not move. Then she stood up, walked to her desk, and opened her laptop. She went to her personal banking portal, the one connected to 3 accounts she had maintained carefully over the years, and began pulling records, 16 years of records. She requested statements from every account, every auto payment history, every co-signature on file. She opened a yellow legal pad and began writing, line by line, date by date, dollar amount by dollar amount. The mortgage, Tamara's tuition at Clark Atlanta University, the utility auto pays, Patricia's car note from the Union City dealership, the 2014 medical bill her mother believed had gone to collections, marked paid, with Carol's account number in the payment field. Year after year, line after line, the numbers filled the page in her careful handwriting. And when the final total was written at the bottom of the last column, it was not a number that surprised her. She had always known, roughly, what it was. She had simply never written it all in one place before, $382,000. The following morning, Carol did three things. First, she called her personal attorney, a woman named Sandra, who had handled her estate planning, and asked one specific question about her legal standing as the cardholder on the venue booking. Sandra confirmed that since the deposit had been charged to Carol's credit card and the booking listed her as the payment contact, Carol had the right to cancel that charge. The outstanding venue balance would then fall to the primary event contact on the reservation, Tamara, Washington. Carol thanked Sandra and ended the call. Second, she contacted her financial advisor and instructed him to cancel the automated payments she had been maintaining on three external accounts: the East Point mortgage servicer, the utility auto-pay arrangements, and the auto draft on Patricia's Buick LeSabre. Her advisor confirmed the changes would take effect within 48 business hours. Carol thanked him and ended that call too. Then she did the third thing. She drove to a dealership in Buckhead. She had been in contact with a sales manager there for 6 weeks, ever since she had test-driven a black Mercedes-Benz E-Class on a Saturday afternoon and then driven home in her Honda because she had not yet decided whether she was ready to stop hiding. That evening, she decided. She walked in, sat at the desk, signed the paperwork, and drove the Mercedes out of the lot. She parked the Honda in her building's garage and did not glance back at it when she walked past. It was not revenge. It was not a performance for anyone to witness. It was the first decision Carol Washington had made fully and without apology for herself in 16 years. She sat in her building's parking lot for a moment before going upstairs. The leather smelled like something she had earned a long time ago, and the stillness inside that car was unlike anything she had felt in longer than she could clearly name. Over the following days, Carol dismantled the financial infrastructure she had spent 16 years building around her family. The same way she had built it, without announcement, without drama, without a single warning call to anyone. The automated mortgage payment that had processed without fail every first of the month since 2009, canceled. The utility auto drafts keeping the lights on and the heat running in the East Point house, canceled. Patricia's car note, canceled. And on the Thursday before the wedding weekend, Carol called the Grand Ballroom in Stone Mountain and canceled the credit card linked to the venue deposit, advising the coordinator that the primary event, contact Tamara Washington, would be in touch to arrange alternate payment for the outstanding $11,000 balance. The coordinator noted it in the file and sent Tamara an automated payment reminder. $11,000 outstanding, due by noon on September 14th. Carol had seen to every detail with the same precision she had brought to everything else for 16 years. There was one final thing left to do. On the Wednesday night before the wedding weekend, Carol sat at the same kitchen table where she had written the numbers, where the tea had gone cold, and she began to write an email. She had spent 3 days turning over exactly what she wanted to say, removing the words that came from anger, keeping only the ones that came from truth. When she finally sat down to write it, the words came quickly and clearly. The way things come when the thinking has already been done, and what remains is reporting the result honestly. She scheduled the email to send at 9 o'clock on the morning of the wedding. Then she closed the laptop. She went to bed, and she slept better than she had in months. The email was addressed to Patricia Washington. The subject line read, "What Love Looked Like," from Carol. The body contained 3 paragraphs. In the first, Carol told her mother she wanted her to have a complete picture of the last 16 years. In the second, she attached 47 pages. Bank statements, payment records, East Point mortgage payment history going back to 2009, Clark Atlanta University tuition receipts from 2012 through 2016, utility payment confirmations year by year, the Buick LeSabre auto draft records, and the 2014 medical bill Patricia had believed went to collections, marked paid, with Carol's account number clearly in the payment field, every document organized, every year labeled, every annual total printed in bold at the bottom of each summary page so that nothing required interpretation from anyone. And in the third paragraph, there was a single sentence. It read, "You told me I didn't fit the picture. I understand now that you were right. I never fit the picture, because I was always the one paying for the frame." September 14th arrived the way all reckoning days arrive, ordinary on the surface, with nothing in the morning air to warn anyone of what was already in motion. Tamara Washington was at a salon across town by 8 in the morning, getting her hair done for the biggest day of her life. Her phone sat on the counter beside the styling chair, face down, on silent. At 8:47, the Grand Ballroom coordinator in Stone Mountain dialed Tamara's number. No answer. She called again at 9. Voicemail. At 9:20, Tamara glanced at her phone and saw the missed calls. She stepped outside the salon, plastic styling cape still on, rollers still in her hair, and called back. The coordinator explained, without softening the language, that the credit card on file for the venue deposit had been cancelled. The outstanding balance of $11,000 was due by noon in order to hold the reservation. Tamara went completely silent on the line. The coordinator waited. Tamara said she would call back, hung up, stood on the sidewalk in the September morning sun, and called her mother. Patricia Washington did not have $11,000. She had not had $11,000 in available funds since before Harold died. She called Derek. Derek called his parents. Beverly James, who had assumed without question that the Washington side had their finances fully handled, received the news with a reaction that contained very little generosity. A conference call assembled quickly. Tamara, Derek, Patricia, Beverly, and Derek's father, Gerald. That lasted 40 minutes and resolved absolutely nothing, because the arithmetic did not balance, no matter how many times the figures were rearranged. The money was not there, and for the first time in 16 years, the person who had always covered the gap, without hesitation, without complaint, without needing to be asked, was not available to be called upon, because she had already made her position clear. In 7 words, she had returned the favor. At some point during that call, while voices overlapped and the panic reached its highest point, Tamara's Aunt Ruth, Harold Washington's sister, a woman who had driven 4 hours from Macon, Georgia, to attend this wedding, and who had observed the Washington family's finances for years without ever being invited to comment, looked at the printed wedding budget on the table in front of her and asked the question that had been sitting unasked for 16 years. She said calmly, to no one in particular, "Where exactly did y'all think this money was coming from?" Nobody answered, because the honest answer required an examination nobody had ever been willing to sit down and do. The comfort had always been there, reliable, automatic, and consistent, and they had received it the way people receive familiar things, without pausing to ask what was behind them. And now, without a warning or a word, what had been behind them had stopped. While voices were still overlapping on the conference call, Patricia Washington felt her phone vibrate in her hand. She looked at the screen. A new email had arrived. The sender was Carol. The subject line read, "What Love Looked Like," from Carol. Patricia stepped away from the group, walked to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby where the family had gathered, and opened it. The 3 paragraphs took her less than 2 minutes to read. The 47 pages of attachments took considerably longer. Patricia had never been a numbers woman and had never pretended otherwise, but the documents were organized with the same precision Carol brought to everything she had ever done, and the annual totals at the bottom of each summary page were printed in bold so that nothing required interpretation from anyone. She scrolled. Mortgage confirmations going back to 2009, tuition receipts, utility records year by year, the car note, the 2014 medical bill marked paid, Carol's account number right there in the payment field. By the time Patricia reached the final page and read the last sentence, "I never fit the picture because I was always the one paying for the frame," she was no longer sitting upright in the lobby chair. She had sunk back into it, the phone resting in her lap, her eyes no longer tracking the screen. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the people moving through the hotel's automatic doors. She looked at nothing, the way a person looks when something has just rearranged their entire understanding of the past 16 years in one long, unforgiving scroll through a phone screen. Tamara found her there 10 minutes later and asked what was wrong. Patricia looked up at her youngest daughter, opened her mouth, and could not find a single word. Not one. Tamara took the phone from her hands and began reading. And then both of them sat together in that hotel lobby in Stone Mountain, on what was supposed to be the happiest morning of the family's year, in complete and total silence. The grand ballroom released the reservation at 12:01 when no payment arrived by the noon deadline. Formal cancellation notices went to both contacts on the file. The florist, who had been loading her van since 10 that morning, received the cancellation call while already on the road and had to turn everything around. The photographer received a text. The caterer received an email. Derek sat in his car in the hotel parking lot for over an hour, making call after call, methodically dismantling every arrangement that 8 months of planning had assembled. And Beverly James stood in the hotel lobby, in her mother-of-the-groom dress, with nowhere now to go, and looked across the room at Patricia Washington, still sitting in that chair, and said nothing. She had set this in motion at her dining room table in March, and in the part of Beverly James that was still honest with herself, she understood exactly what she had started and what it had cost an entire family. That evening, Patricia Washington drove to Decatur. She sat in the parking lot of Carol's building for nearly 20 minutes before she walked the buzzer. She did not call ahead. She rang, and Carol answered, clear, calm, and utterly unsurprised, and let her in. What happened inside that apartment over the next 2 hours has never been described in full by either woman to anyone outside that room. Carol has not spoken about it. Patricia has not recounted it. What is known is that Patricia left just before 10 o'clock that night, that she sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time before starting the engine, that she called Carol twice in the week that followed without reaching her, and that the third time she called, 3 weeks later, Carol picked up. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. When it ended, the payments had not been restored, but something else had been built, perhaps for the very first time between them. The beginning of genuine, unguarded honesty. The mortgage company sent a delinquency notice to the East Point house in October. Patricia spent 2 days believing it was a banking error before her neighbor's son, a young man who worked in the insurance industry, sat at her kitchen table and walked through the documents carefully, helping her understand what had actually been there all along, underneath the surface of the life she had been living. Patricia Washington sat at the kitchen table that evening. In the house Carol had been paying for since 2009, and she looked at the walls. She looked at the furniture. She looked at the photographs on the mantel. Harold, her daughters as children, Christmas pictures, Easter pictures, years of Sunday dinners she had hosted inside a home she had not actually been funding. And she understood, for the first time, and with a weight that no amount of time would completely lift, who had been paying for every wall around every one of those photographs for 16 years. Carol did not restore the payments. What she did, after a period of deliberate, protected quiet, was arrange for her mother to meet with a financial counselor who helped Patricia build a workable budget and apply for a senior citizen housing assistance program she qualified for. Carol covered 1 month of the mortgage as a bridge payment, made openly, made directly, both their names acknowledged in the transaction for the first time in the history of any money Carol had ever sent toward that house. She told Patricia clearly that she would not disappear from her life. She also told her that she would never again disappear into the background of it. Those were her terms, not ultimatums, terms. Patricia agreed to them the way a woman agrees when she has run out of alternatives and has begun, slowly, genuinely, and with real pain, to understand the full weight of what she had spent 16 years not seeing. Tamara and Derek were married in February, 6 months after the September collapse, in a small ceremony in the sanctuary of Greater Faith Baptist Church, the same church where Harold Washington had sat in the same pew for 30 years. By all accounts, it was a beautiful service, honest, simple, and filled with people who genuinely loved the couple. Carol was not invited. Carol did not go. She spent that Saturday the same way she had spent the September weekend, on her own terms, without apology, and without checking her phone until she was ready. She had brunch at a restaurant she loved in Midtown Atlanta. She walked the Beltline in good shoes with nowhere particular to be. She drove home in the black Mercedes, with the windows down and something low on, the radio. And when she finally checked her phone, there was nothing on it that required anything of her. For the first time in 16 years, that silence was not a weight pressing down on her chest. It was a choice, her choice, and she had earned every second of it. In the spring, Carol booked a vacation, 2 full weeks at a resort in Montego Bay, Jamaica. She went alone. She sat on the beach with a book and a cold glass and watched the water without thinking about the mortgage, the tuition, the text message, the 47 pages, or the lobby in Stone Mountain. She called nobody. She posted no photographs. She existed, present, unhurried, and genuinely at peace in a way that had not been available to her for a very long time. She came home on a Sunday morning, drove from the airport through Atlanta, walked into her Decatur apartment, and put the kettle on the stove. The water began to heat. Afternoon light moved across the hardwood floor. The sounds of the city rose gently through the balcony window, and Carol Washington stood in her kitchen and felt, for the first time in 16 years, the irreplaceable peace of a woman whose life belongs fully and without condition to herself, not to a family's comfort, not to a curtain that keeps everyone else standing while she remains unseen, to herself, completely, finally, and without apology. This story asks us to sit with something that is not comfortable and not easy, not as entertainment, but as a genuine question about the families we come from and the ones we are building right now. How many people in your life have been Carol? How many people are holding something together in total silence, paying a price nobody sees, absorbing a cost nobody calculates, while the people they love form their entire opinion of them based on the surface being presented? Carol hid her sacrifice because she feared what visibility would cost her. She was not wrong to fear it, but invisibility carried its own price, one she had not fully counted. When you make yourself unseen, you give the people around you permission to see you however they choose. And people, without malice, without awareness, without intending any harm at all, will often choose to see you as less than you are. Because looking at someone carefully requires something of you, and it is always easier not to look. Carol never wanted gratitude recorded in a ledger. She never wanted a Sunday dinner toast or a speech delivered in a room full of people. What she wanted, what she had always wanted underneath all of it, was to be treated as someone who belonged, to be included in the picture she had spent 16 years funding without condition or complaint. That was the entirety of the ask. It was not a complicated thing to give. It was the simplest thing in the world. And the real tragedy of the Washington family is not Beverly James's dining room verdict, or Patricia's text message, or Tamara's 7 words. The real tragedy is that it was always so straightforward to give Carol what she needed. Nobody chose to do it consistently. Nobody did it in the ways that counted. Not until she stopped making it effortless for them to overlook her. And by then, every cost had already been paid in full, by the one person in that family who had been paying for everything all along. We want to ask you something before you go, and we want your honest answer in the comments, because that is what this channel is built on. Do you believe Carol waited too long? Should she have spoken sooner, shown the receipts years earlier, forced the conversation, demanded to be seen? Or do you believe the silence was the only protection she had, and the moment she finally revealed everything was exactly the right moment? Not one day sooner, not one sacrifice less? Drop your answer below. And while you are there, tell us, have you ever been the Carol in your own family? Have you ever held something together in the dark while the people closest to you formed their entire opinion of you, based on the surface you showed them? Because this channel believes that story is far more common than anyone is willing to admit out loud. If you are new here, welcome, subscribe, and stay with us. The next story coming to Blood Betrayal Files will make you question everything you think you know about the people sitting closest to you. We will see you then.